lovelies and unlovelies alike. Housekeeping. Ronin is kind of stalled. I just haven't felt particularly like working on it, but I have been getting some more art pieces in and commissioning some more art pieces. So that aspect of the game continues to move ahead. T-shirt's written some interesting stuff on katanas and sword etiquette and so on for me. Hopefully he can get a bit more done before he heads back to work. Otherwise I will have to do the rest of it, which is fine. But you know, I was and am paying him, so if he doesn't want the money, that's fine. But inspiration is a weird creature. Meantime, searching for some direction in which to have some inspiration. I've been tinkering with other things. I broke open a very old file for another 100 series book called 100 Apocalypses, or 100 Ways to End the World, or something. I haven't decided quite what to call it. That's rough going because the response to an awful lot of apocalyptic events is to bunker down, wait it out, and then rebuild civilization. And you can only say that so many times in so many different ways before it becomes repetitious and boring. And reading back through my own text, you would think some of it was churned out by AI, because I end up saying the same thing in a similar way over and over again. I've also tinkered with a thing called Rack and Ruin, which is a set of OSR house rules, kind of, to turn the OSR into a game I wouldn't mind playing, actually, because I have my objections to D&D style play. They kind of ruin it for me. I find it way too basic, basically. But Rack and Ruin is challenging myself on a couple of fronts to write something for the OSR, and to write something that primarily uses race as class, hence Rack, R-A-C. Taking some heavy inspiration from other things like Feral and Foe in 2000 AD, which I like very much. So I finished like one unit of that, but obviously with the house repairs and stuff going on, which starts very soon, and I don't have a lot of money to throw around, which will mean having to use AI art until maybe I do a collected edition at some other point later. So I need to decide whether I want the blowback that comes with that or not, or whether I release it with virtually no art and then say, oh yeah, I'll come back and look at it later. I don't know. Decisions. Yeah, work on the house finally starts this coming week. Basically, there's a whole bunch of stuff that needs to be worked on and replaced in the garage. Old window frames, old windows, things like that need doing. And then on my house, the relatively small amounts of asbestos, thanks 1970s builds, need to be clad and rendered safe, basically. It's all outside, so it's not really been any threat at any point anyway, but obviously, you know, it needs to be dealt with. So that'll be fun. It should be a very noisy and disrupted week next week. As if I didn't have enough going on, I also got a text from the Department of Work and Pensions about my personal independence payment decision, which has apparently been made about 2 years late. But the text doesn't actually tell you what the decision is. So I have been waiting on my letter that provides my decision for a few days now. Hopefully it'll arrive today. If not, it won't be till next week. But as you can imagine, when your support money, when you're partially disabled, as I am, is being withheld potentially, you kind of want to know what's going on and whether you need to lodge an appeal or whatever else. Hopefully, since nothing much has changed, though ironically in the couple of years since they last assessed me, I've got the blood pressure problems. Hopefully, given nothing had changed, it'll just settle on the same decision. We can hope. They also know I'm a difficult bastard who takes things to tribunal, so we'll see whether that helps. It's been an interesting week, being cancelled by the right wing now as well as the left, which is something I'm more used to, and kind of expected more, which is a little unfair, perhaps. When I was turned on by the ostensible left wing, that was a shock and a surprise. But as someone who grew up around various Christian right moral panics, expecting the right wing to go batshit was never quite as much of a surprise, I suppose. Like I say, perhaps that's unfair, but it has cushioned my brain somewhat. Mrs. Grimm and others are telling me to leave the whole topic alone for now, but, I'm a contrarian. And since that's what most of the comments were this last week, I feel that I should reply to a few of them. Now, I don't, generally speaking, delete comments. I delete empty abuse. So, like, if you call me a cunt, that might get deleted if that's all it is, or something worse or more personal or nasty. But if it's you're a cunt, I don't agree with you, here's why, point A, B, C, then it's likely to be left. That said, YouTube deletes comments, and I have no control over that. Some of them end up in a sort of backroom message box saying, these might be naughty comments, do you want to display them or not? And I almost invariably do tick the yes thing, but I don't delete comments, pretty much, except in those circumstances that I've already laid out. So if your comment is being deleted, it's 95% of the time YouTube and not me. If you want to avoid it, avoid links, avoid certain keywords, though you never know what those keywords are. Try commenting again, try commenting as a reply to somebody else, but a lot of it is outside of my control, for which I apologise. So on to the comments. On positive gaming things in the last decade, Need More Cowbell says, I think the democratization of the industry and the technological advances have been, while not perfect, largely a net positive. I can play online with friends and family nationally and internationally through software. That's improved substantially over the last decade. The graphics for playing on a VTT get better and better every year. Graphics packages I bought 5 years ago look outdated today. Crowdfunding in the hobby has been a net positive. It's like being alive in a world where you began with 4 television networks and you had to take what was given to you, and now you're in a world where you might have too many options. Yes, you have to work harder to cut through the noise, but I'd rather have more choice. There are always trade-offs. Yeah, and I guess I concentrated on the trade-offs that happen there. Like playing online, people don't feel so much of a sense of commitment, and so skip sessions quite often. VTTs I don't think need to be particularly graphically good, but some people seem to. Every set of bells and whistles you add to a VTT makes it less accessible, and many of them have been created by hobbyists rather than people used to working on GUIs and so on, so a lot of them are very, very clunky. Crowdfunding started out as a positive, but now I think it's probably a net negative because it's just being used as a pre-order system, mostly by large companies who crowd out the smaller companies, making it harder and harder for them to get attention and backing. There are a few noteworthy exceptions, of course, but it's generally speaking, I think, been negative. Plus, it has artificially inflated the amount of money people expect to make from projects and how much people expect to get paid for projects. It's also intensified the attention economy at the same time that social media algorithms have squeezed you out if you're trying to promote your products and so on, even to your followers, but you're unwilling or unable to pay for that advertising. So Yeah, and then, as you say, there's this fire hose of content, much of which is dross. Sturgeon's law: 90% of anything is crap. Right? It's good to have more choices, but it's just not navigable. So I don't know where the new equilibrium is going to be. Maybe anyone in the creative industries is just going to have to kind of give up on making a sustainable living at it, especially in the overserved niche products, perhaps. I don't know. On playing my own games, Age of Adventure says, excuse my ignorance, but are these questions that are posed at the start randomly generated by AI or submitted by viewers and then read out by AI? So, the questions are submitted by viewers. I use an AI that voice clones Rani Rani from that recent FromSoft game because I like the voice, and I wanted a consistent voice for the questions. Recently, of course, Greg from Ares Chronicles has been tackling some questions that I set to him. So yeah, that's not an AI doing a different voice or me doing a different voice. That is an actual different person, like it says on the thumbnail. Over on Grim Streams, which I don't normally cover comments on, there were a few because I did a little quick short live stream about parting company with the Red Room. I've lost the person's name, but here's a comment. I think your nuanced take on trying to understand why what happened is wonderful personally, but I would add that many people prior have had the same mentality regarding school incidents in the US, and rather than good faith engagement and studying as to why it occurred, basically everyone outside of the problem will choose to use the subject to push their own agenda and move on the moment it can no longer further their own goals without ever addressing the core of the problem. So it happens again and the cycle repeats ad infinitum, with the only changing factor being who is involved, never why. Something better will come along for you eventually, with people capable of nuance, even if they don't fully agree with your takes. Yeah, there's kind of a filter, isn't there, for people? I make a joke of it sometimes that I post controversial takes because I feel like I'm getting too popular. And that's not a place of comfort and relaxation for me. Yeah, and I want to kind of shit test my audience and see if they're going to stick around even when they disagree with me. And most of the time they do. Speaking of shootings, I think the last time I had anything even remotely close to this reaction was the Kyle Rittenhouse thing. But people didn't lose their shit to the same degree, and if we consider how divisive and nasty things were around Kyle Rittenhouse and his murder of multiple people, if things are worse now, that does not bode well, does it? But yeah, that's why I commented now, because if now is not the time, then it usually ends up that it's never the time, whether it's school shootings or presidential assassinations or whatever else. Now is the time. People are engaged with the subject and interested in it, so now is the time to try and put your take, your spin, your understanding of what's going on in front of people, because they're more likely to notice, even if they don't like it. Also on Parting Ways with the Red Room, Waltz4425 said the Conservative Party, meaning the UK party, is far right. No, they are democratic socialists. You do need some serious help. I'm sure you'd be creaming yourself over the socialist policies from the Labour Party. Where do you even start with that? The Conservative Party are far right. They are not democratic socialists. They have, during their every tenure since I've been alive, done their very best to try and dismantle or privatise the welfare state or public ownership. and to suppress and subvert democracy. It's sounding a bit familiar there, isn't it? They are not in any way, shape or form democratic socialists. As to the modern Labour Party, they are slightly further to the right than Blair's New Labour were, and they were hardly socialist themselves. So unfortunately, we seem to be slipping into the same pattern as the US, where we have a far-right party and we have a centre-right party. You could argue Labour is still somewhat left-wing in some ways, but they're ever-decreasing ways, and that's unfortunate. Hopefully we'll see some electoral reform, some changes that may eventually get us to something like proportional representation, dare I say it. I mean, giving votes to 16-year-olds and getting rid of hereditary lords is a good start. But we really need PR to make our country more democratic and to allow people to vote for what they want, which is consistently here, as in the States, further to the left than the options we're given. Paul 1147, I think, or possibly Paul 47 says, I say this with no malice, but there is not much shit for you to take anymore. All the civilized and righteous people in the industry utterly despise you. Most forums and boards have zero good words to say about you. Pretty much everybody hates you already. It's your choice, but I don't think that antagonizing some of the few people that don't think you're a monster is a good idea. So this is why I said, this was said because I said that the reason I prefaced my reviews of Red Room stuff with a disclaimer about their transphobia and where I stand on it, was because I didn't want to be associated with that, and I didn't want to get shit over things that I don't believe. That was... It took me a long time to get around to those reviews because I talked to friends, I talked to my counsellor, I talked to my therapist about it, because I was uncomfortable increasingly with the stances that they were publicly taking, and I didn't want to be associated with it. But it's not about currying favour from other people who have been shit to me. It's for my own peace of mind, and because I work with trans people, and I have to be able to look them in the eye and let them know that I don't hate them. Right? And I surrounded the disclaimer with all manner of excuse making and so on for the Red Room, contextualizing why they react as badly as they do to trans people and other woke scold stuff, I don't think I could have bent over backwards anymore, but for my own sake, I had to say that I don't agree with them on that, and for the sake of people I care about. I don't know why that's such a difficult concept for people to stomach, but there you go. Full Metal Dragon says, I'm just wondering if there is a part of you that deep down seeks out being the centre of controversy and anarchy. All of this about Trump just seems like you're repeating history that caused you so much crap back over a decade ago when you put out your blog post about rape in stories. It's like there's an aspect of your personality that can't resist putting out opinion pieces that you know will cause other people to end up pissed off at you. You shouldn't be surprised about anyone on the right finding your Antifa-like opinion comments distasteful, and your timing is at the height of the right's anger. No, I just believe stuff and I say it. And somehow I still get caught out by surprise a lot of the time, though I did predict this kind of reaction from the crazy people on the right. I didn't anticipate there being quite so many crazy people completely caught up in the Trump cult. I had hoped that I had developed enough social capital and respect that when I said this, based upon the reactions and so on, I was already seeing that people who otherwise wouldn't might actually listen to me. So much for that idea. Disco Barbarian, if you put out your opinion and others disagree with you, suck it up. You're not a victim despite how much you whinge like one. So disagreement is a different animal to trying to organize a boycott or death threats, implicit or explicit, or whisper networks or shouty networks, which are more common on the right. You know, these are all organized efforts to shut someone up or to remove them from the conversation. So having an opinion and someone disagreeing with it and explaining why they disagree with it is one thing. Screaming and mass hysteria is another. And I've never been able to abide hypocrisy either. A lot of these people who have decided to turn on me over this are people who have previously been all about, no, it's just jokes, bro, and you know, you should be able to say whatever you want without having problems like this. You know, the hypocrisy really gets me. So on to old fat con man gets shot, survives. Zion Blade says, deleted my other comment. Don't want to hear that the lefties have been the real fascists. Again, I don't delete comments. See the beginning of the video. Fascists are not left-wing. I appreciate that many Americans seem to have been completely miseducated on this, but fascism, while a loose and amorphous ideological sort of stance, is not left-wing. Definitionally, by the few ideological points you can poke at, it is definitionally right-wing. Left-wing fascism is an oxymoron, and you can have left-wing authoritarianism like Stalin and so on, but that's about it. James Fullard says, you really are a scumbag, unsubbed. Why? This is the mystery really here. What is it that I actually did? I gave a calm, sober, reasoned analysis of the problem and the things we need to think about when it comes to political assassinations, and that's somehow bad, but never really explained why. Ajax Plunkett says, shallow comparison, also not like you to ignore the Biden corruption and incompetence of today and going back 35 years. And precog fear-mongering is what the mainstream and left-leaning press has been doing since 2016. I'm out. I don't think it is a shallow comparison. I think people think it's a shallow comparison because it has been overmade and made hysterically in the past. As it comes to Biden, I'd say incompetence and egotism. Sure, corruption, no. And I would also point out that Trump is manifestly, proudly and openly corrupt, right down to basing himself and his Secret Service detail and his entourage out of his hotels to enrich himself. It goes right down to things that are that petty, that's just who he is. He's corrupt to the core. He can't seem to behave in any other way. And to compare that to what? I don't know. It just seems silly. Eastwood Ravine says, you really don't get Americans, let alone Trump. Trump occupies the same political space that 1990s Bill Clinton did. So I went and checked. We're all aware of the political compass. It has its flaws, but it's a useful point of comparison here. Bill Clinton was at -3 coordinates down in the libertarian left a bit. One of the most left and most libertarian presidents the US has ever had. That's small L libertarian, obviously. Trump, on the other hand, during his previous term, was at +8, +5, placing him firmly in the right authoritarian quadrant, and he's only moved to the right and gotten more authoritarian since. I would argue he started that move during his term, and after it, things have only gotten worse. Of course, a lot of that is not Trump directly, but the people around advising, and otherwise being involved in any potential second Trump administration, which is now, as I say, even more further to the right. King Skellyhands says, I'm happy to see comrades across the pond are also paying attention. Sorry these trogs are giving you grief, Grim. You showed them a mirror and they didn't like their reflection. So it would seem, but it's the hypocrisy that gets me. All these people who are all for expressing whatever opinion you have without consequence, and they suddenly change their mind when it's an opinion they don't like. Disappointed. James X says, I'm sorry, you're never going to convince me that removing pornographic books from the classrooms of 8-year-olds fits the classic and established definition of censorship. Those books are not being rounded up and burned, after all, they just aren't appropriate to thrust into the faces of children. College campus suppression of ideas and speech, however, is the purview of the left. You're never going to convince me that sex education is pornography. What next? You're going to start banning biology textbooks because they describe the reproductive system and have a sort of cutaway diagram of the penis and the uterus. That's about as erotic as a visit to the butcher's. You're never going to convince me that sex ed is pornography, and none of these things are being thrust into the face of 8-year-olds or whatever. This is just an example of the same paranoid hysteria. Yes, college campus suppression is bad. I have said so repeatedly and at length for many years. However, so is this. Just because you're censoring something you think deserves to be censored doesn't make that censorship okay. That's exactly what they're doing. So you either have to be okay with both or not okay with both. Midnight Green says, you've absolutely lost what sense you had. Go away, Jim. Yeah, so the day before, most of you respected me and the criticisms that I had of the left. I actually have qualifications in politics and history and communications, so I'm arguably more qualified to talk about this than I am games, where I'm just an autodidact. Right? That you turn on such a dime just proves the problem that I talked about. Midnight Green says, he was literally already president for 4 years. You need to get help for TDS. There is another form of TDS that doesn't get talked about. It's the form that has people who refuse to wear face masks for years, taping diapers to their ears. It is a group that will cheer on the massive centralization of power in the office of the president because they see it helping their president, without thinking about, what if you get a president that's not something you like? As people cheering for the overturning and corruption of electoral systems, such as postal votes and gerrymandering, to help their candidate without thinking about the consequences. Yeah, he was already president for 4 years, and he was a fucking disaster, and things very much look like they'd be worse next time around. But last time, I was saying he wasn't a fascist, and that was getting me censored by the ostensible left, right? Now I'm saying, look, things have changed, the people around him have changed, their plans, their policy positions and so on have moved even further to the right, and now he ticks all the boxes of fascism, and now you're acting in exactly the same stupid way that the pseudo-left did back then. Give your head a wobble. Comic Gladiator says he's one of those people who slowly became extremists on the far left, but in his mind he's centre-left, so his world is full of scary right-wingers because most people are right of him. I have always been on the extreme left. I have never said I am anything other than extreme left. I do not see myself as a centrist. I do see myself as a pragmatist. and I know my political desires are never going to be made manifest in the world, so I'm kind of resigned to living in the world that we do live in and trying to make it slightly better. And the world is full of scary right-wingers, sociopaths, and people voting against their own best interests, either through venal selfishness, stupidity, sociopathy, or just having been exposed to nothing but right-wing propaganda. I mean, 75% of people just vote the same way their parents did. That's the amount of thought that goes into it. And yeah, there are stupid and horrible and nasty and venal and selfish and sociopathic and horrible people on the left too, but the ideology isn't one of that. James Fullard says, how many more bad comments do you need to realise you screwed up, son? For years, I have been receiving a torrent of abuse and assertions that I am wrong on my Kalergi plan videos. Argumentum ad populum, or unpopulum in this case, I guess, is a fallacy for a reason. I can be right despite how many people disagree with me, and I don't think filtering out extremists is a screw up, exactly. Paul Cooper says, you just put another bullseye on your back. I'm offended you believe I am a fascist for supporting a political candidate. I mean, if you support a political candidate who's a fascist, I don't think you have any room to be offended. But of course you have to remember that fascists have been elected in the past to councils here in the UK, to Parliament in many places. The naughty German fascists were originally elected. Not everyone who backed them was necessarily a fascist or gave full-throated support to everything they ended up doing, but they did get duped into voting for them. So you may or may not be a fascist, but why would you be supporting a fascist candidate? Maybe you believe that they're not fascistic, but I can back up my opinion, and I have. If Mrs. Grimm hadn't told me to leave the topic alone, and this is probably the last time it'll be touched on, then I would probably be doing a video with a lengthy presentation on why I believe he now rises to the level of a fascist. So, Jeff Hatch says, you sound like you're on drugs. Came here from Diversity and Dragons. You're clearly talking out of your ass. Stick to games. Well, again, I'm arguably more qualified to talk about this subject than games. Saying that I sound like I'm on drugs is part of a sort of family of nasty comments that I got about my appearance and various other things. And again, people were fine with me 24 hours previous to that. So, I don't know. Again, give your head a wobble. Full Metal Dragon says, it's all BS. One thing most people forget, especially most Americans, is that Trump was a lifelong Democrat until the start of 2016. He only made the switch to the right in 2016 more as a joke and because he knew that Clinton already had the Democratic nod. Trump is not a true Republican. The only reason he is where he is because most Americans and most people, period, are gullible, don't pay attention to details, believe everything they see on television as if everything in TV is somehow real, and are too indoctrinated from the conveyor belt education system to be able to put two brain cells together to be able to think for themselves. I mean, that's an even more negative take than mine, I think. I think Trump cares about Trump, and I think that's all Trump really cares about. Last time he was in office, he had various machineries of government in place to kind of hem him in a bit, and advisors who were, in many cases horrible people, but at least somewhat sane horrible people. This time around, no such guardrails are going to be there, and the people around him are much further to the right and have many, many horrible plans, such as politicizing America's civil service by making most of the appointments political and then filling them with people who will just follow what the administration says. These should be alarm bells for everybody, but it seems, unfortunately, that they're not. Ghost Knight says, Graham, I like you, but you've been deluded by globalist indoctrination. Trump is no fascist, quite the contrary. He just wants a free, prosperous America, and that goes against what the globalist agenda wants. That is the kind of paranoid conspiracy theories that have also driven fascism. Those are kind of secondary trait of fascism. I'm an internationalist, not a globalist per se. Globalist per se. Great, now I've got the flat earth people thinking I'm on their side. Pacifist says, and the shit Biden has done wasn't as corrupt as fuck. Things were great in the US under Trump until COVID hit, which would screw over any president that was in office at the time. He was de-escalating Korea, for fuck's sake, amongst many other things. Unsubbed, another leftist with TDS. Again, I'll point out that TDS also has another manifestation amongst people who blindly follow him. Things weren't great. Trump blew a $2 to $3 trillion hole in the US budget, handing money to people who were already wealthy. Caused an enormous amount of pain and problems for people within the US. Internationally, what you say is de-escalation was in fact appeasement. If Trump hadn't had his period in office, Putin probably never would have invaded Ukraine. For starters, Trump quadrupled the scale of the drone war, drone operations by the US on others. He committed political assassinations that destabilized the Middle East even more, including aggravating people by moving the US embassy in Israel. Where this idea comes from that he was a peacenik, or that he was de-escalating things, or that he was good for anything, I don't know. Unless the only metric you have is something that is largely not under the presidency's control, like, say, gas prices, I can't see how anyone would say this, unless they had TDS of the right-wing kind. Almanac of Sleep says, define fascism. So, alright, back in 2016, when I said Trump wasn't a fascist, I used a particular definition of fascism, though it's hard to give a fully solid definition of fascism because it's a bit wibbly-wobbly and there are many different forms of it. I used a list of traits from the conservative political philosopher Roger Scruton, whose Dictionary of Political Thought is a standard reference text in political science courses. So fascism is characterized by corporatism, nationalism, hostility to democracy, hostility to egalitarianism, hostility to the values of the liberal Enlightenment, the cult of the leader, an admiration for his special qualities, a respect for collective organization, and a love for the symbols associated with it, and that is military and religious symbolism. So, is Trump corporatist? Now, corporatist doesn't quite mean what you might think it means from the name. It doesn't mean ruled by corporations exactly. It's kind of the inverse of socialism, though. Marxist socialism, to be specific. Marxist socialism attempts to get rid of corporations and to take control of everything. Corporatism brings in special interest groups, brings in corporations, and basically gives them special treatment by the state. And we can see how MAGA has done that in the past. Again, right down to the kind of venal nonsense of Trump using his own hotels to house everything that he's involved with so that he can trouser the cash. Nationalism. I don't think anyone can argue about Trump's nationalism. Now, Americans are very nationalistic anyway, but MAGA is that but more so. America First is that but more so. You could argue that standard rah-rah American nationalism is just patriotism, but the MAGA crowd with their border walls and their other nonsense, definitely nationalist. The Trump cult has a hostility to democracy, at least when it goes against them. They want to gerrymander, they want to remove methods of voting that they feel favour the opposition. They will claim everything is cheated, everything is invalid. So they're just not very democratic at all. It gets a little confusing for some people because Trump is willing to devolve certain amounts of power to the states more, despite having gathered an enormous amount of power to the presidency, which has now been made even worse by the Supreme Court. But that is largely to empower authoritarianism at the state scale on things like abortion rights and so on. So it's actually a gathering of power to that authoritarian right position. Hostility to egalitarianism. They don't want people to be treated the same. The targets might be a little different. People of different religions, people of different ethnicities, immigrants. Yeah, so maybe it's slightly different to the early to mid 20th century forms of anti-egalitarianism, but it is still there. LGBT people as well. Hostility to the values of the liberal enlightenment. Well, we can see an awful lot of anti-science nonsense from within the Trump cult, whether it be COVID denialism, anti-vaxxing. There's innumerable examples of this. A real disdain for experts, for education, as we've seen in some of these comments and elsewhere. Cult of the leader, ear nappies, I think that's all we really need to say about that. And nonsense like the idea that Trump is some amazing businessman or that countries should be run like businesses. He's a TV clown. Now, collectivism, this throws a few people in the same way that corporatism does, but if you think about collectivism in terms of nationalism, then I think you understand what is meant there. And Trump's love of symbols associated with that collective organisation, military and religious symbolism, is of course well known. He doesn't really back it up particularly, but he wanted a military drive past of the kind that dictatorships have, and he had a bunch of protesters gassed and beaten so he could hold a Bible up outside of a church. And his followers are certainly hip deep in religious symbolism. So to me, and you can feel free to disagree, some people have and have actually spelled out why they disagree, but to me he ticks every single box of Roger Scruton's broad definition of fascism. So to me, yeah, this is American fascism. Daddy Stab says, unsubbed and reported. I don't know what he thinks I should have been reported for, but apparently I was. Wichiden says, I understand that not all leftist governments are bad for their people. Why is it difficult for you to understand that the same applies to the right? Maybe I've not given it enough mind since radical Islam wants to end us all. That worries me more. Islam is not really in a position to cause any national scale problems or to destroy democracy, or to destabilize the world into more wars and so on, in the way that a badly run fascistic US would be. And of course, with all of this, you have to think that fascism has had many different manifestations. Mussolini's fascism is not the same as Hitler's fascism, is not the same as Franco's fascism, and so on. American fascism will be its own beast. It's hard for me to understand that right-wing governments are not bad for their people because of their policies. That is largely where the disconnect for me comes. And finally, as a nice little break from all those negative comments, the Kalergi plan. Nils de Brooks actually quoted from Kalergi, from the right book even, so I want to encourage that behaviour. So he quotes, "The man of the future will be of mixed race. Today's races and classes will gradually disappear owing to the vanishing of space, time and prejudice. The Eurasian Negroid race of the future, similar in its appearance to the ancient Egyptians, will replace the diversity of peoples with the diversity of individuals." Written by Count Kalergi, Practical Idealism, 1925. But that is not a plan. That is a prediction based upon the trends that he was already seeing in 1925. The telegraph, the telephone, aeroplane travel, right? And the fact that he was from a mixed background. So these are predictions, not plans, which is the point I've been making for a very long time. Someone with an unpronounceable Polish name says, Oh God, an American talking about Europeans and the European Union, thinking he understands it, explaining things without deeper insight. How typical. Confused in British. Zang. At the end of World War II, the Axis and the Allies went to war with A-bombs until nobody was left to fight. In this atomic wasteland, a new breed of rockabilly hero arises. From the gleaming domes of Science City Zero to the sleazy roller derbies of Vegas and the sky fortress of the Fourth Reich, there's a new world for the taking. 45, Psychobilly Retropocalypse, available at lulu.com and RPG Now.